Magic.
What say you? The fuck is ceremonial magic?
What say you? We pulled up an article from the interwebs.
Nah, this is about warlocks.
Oh wow, this candle is not finessing right now. Join us to the party. Yeah, so we spoke, Ian and I spoke yesterday, and we were talking about the last podcast we did, and we were talking about moving forward, what we could do to make the show more creative, more innovative, and we said to ourselves, let's have a theme for the episode. And immediately started brainstorming ideas for the show, and every time I came up with an idea, Ian was laughing at me.
Nah, it wasn't the idea. It was just like, I don't know, it was crazy.
It was just that, it was like how the idea popped in, and then I was like abruptly like, oh, I got an idea.
Yeah.
And the gap between having the idea and just communicating it was so short that it was like kind of abrupt almost.
True.
But anyway, he said, what do you think we should do for a show? And Ceremonial Magic came up for me because on the last episode, I feel like I was grumpy Andrews and I didn't have the best performance. And when I think about it, there's a lot of reasons that could be, but one of them is not having like a ritual. That was our first time we ever did the Thursday at 3:00.
Yeah. I think it was just like the opposite of like placebo, which is an element of ceremonial magic that we're going to talk about today. And then the opposite is like, yo, you ready to do this? Like, I guess so.
I guess, dude.
It's like, yeah, I don't know what that reinforces, but probably not peak performance today, Brendan.
No. Well, I mean, in the past, the way we would typically start would be almost improv too, or we were just like, we're feeling good. So we're like, all right, we should probably turn the show on. What do you think? And then this time, like I said, I just didn't control the variables that were my control. Like as an example, you said you've been meditating over the last few days?
Yeah.
And so that was probably a push in the right direction of feeling good and feeling clear. I hadn't been meditating.
Yeah.
So that was one for me.
Yeah, it's like we forget when we get the thing about practices or things that are good for you is you get a hold on them and then you think, and like all things, they change, and you think it's just like you can't just autopilot it to the full extent. You still have to be fully engaged in the different activities. It's not like the going through the motions of activities that are good for you, but actively being engaged in things that are good for you.
Yeah. It only takes a couple days of like your routine changing for it to not be part of your groove.
Yeah.
Right. We traveled a little bit.
Yeah.
And
buddy, wait till we're fucking back in one place, dude. My routine is gonna get
dialed in.
Then we're talking 12 to 24 months from now. My routine is gonna be dialed in.
Yes. Ian's gonna be peak performer 18 months from now. So you watch out, everybody.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was kind of part of it, was looking back at last episode, saying to myself, I could have put myself in a better position to be successful and perform. Like all the other times where, performances were important to me, like speaker slam or different presentations or even calls at work for sales calls, I would do certain things. I would have a routine or a ritual leading up to it that would help me perform. So I didn't do that. Last episode, I call myself Grumpy Andrews is the note that I made. But the other bit was we finally got to Guatape, Colombia, and it's like basically completely locked down.
Yeah, it's totally COVID-centric for sure.
And actually back in Costa Rica, Ian and I had a conversation about going into Colombia knowing that it was like quarantine and lockdown, and we're like, we could kind of use a week of kind of relaxation.
And it was good for that.
It really was.
Past a week is kind of like, shit.
Yeah, I don't know how they did that in Toronto and other places, but yeah. So we came to Guatape. Yeah.
In terms of listening, I'm cool. Do we want to have the music on for the whole time? You cool with that? Or yeah, I'm just I'm just thinking about the listening experience. Whatever.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of like a cool.
No, I'm not. It's not. I don't know. It's literally like I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think it'll be fine.
Yeah, cool.
I think it's better than the cars in the background anyway.
That's fair.
So y'all have to let us know if you listen to this and you're wondering if we're wondering, does the music help or make it worse? But
nothing else.
Yeah, we ended up in Guatape and it was closed, and so we basically had nowhere to be, nothing to do, and we were meandering through the streets in no rush at all. And we ended up in a convenience store, and I made a remark saying to myself, because I have no like agenda or list of things I need to buy, I can actually see everything that this store has to offer. And then Ian said to me, he said, the real question is, what kind of ceremonial magic are we going to create?
Yeah.
And then that was
we
kind of
really
the seed
ventured far
planted.
and got some alcohol and caffeine. Got alcohol and caffeine and sugar.
Yeah, we got peanut covered M&Ms.
Yeah. Peanut covered M&Ms.
Yeah,
chocolate covered peanut. So
this performance is clearly better than the last.
So ceremonial magic is basically, I mean, you could do it by yourself or in a group of people, and it's basically reclaiming in a way the art of ritual, where as society has become more and more secular, which I think from like an ideological monopoly standpoint is great and allowing people to do what they want, and I don't think I would attribute myself to any organized religion or anything like that. However, there's also the expression, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And while we may object with many of the truth and moral claims of many religions and like ideological groups, it doesn't mean that every facet within that needs to be eradicated. So within that is a lot of rituals. And because when we look at rituals through the lens of some sort of objective metaphysical claim based on like a group, like a Catholic eating the wafer and thinking it's the body of Jesus Christ and the blood and the wine and that kind of stuff, that because we don't agree with that from like an objective standpoint, that the ritual itself doesn't have value. And I think that's something that both of us have kind of stumbled upon a lot as we've had certain like psychedelic experiences, I guess, and just realized there's probably more going on than meets the eye than our senses within our sight, sound, hearing, smell, feel, reality. All those kind of things. That there's something there, we don't know what it is, but there's something there. And ceremonial magic is, I think the best way to give a definition of it is just through the example of an example of ceremonial magic that would be probably low-hanging fruit for most people to be able to kind of understand what we're getting at, is thinking about a bunch of like women getting together and getting drunk and starting a fire and getting photos of all their exes and then burning them in the fire. And it's kind of a completion standpoint. So it's like a external symbolic ceremony type thing to kind of replicate some sort of internal struggle or idea and kind of processing that in a certain way through a certain lens. Anything you had to add?
Yeah, it sounds to me like making the internal match the external, right? And, you know, a lot of people have challenge coming to terms with the end of a relationship. So in this case, it's very symbolic.
Yeah, it is. Right? Well, I think that's what it is. Yeah. That's what it is. You said the internal match the external. It's almost like having an external symbolic representation of the internal to thus imbue it with a certain sense of meaning to then complete the external or complete the internal through the expression of an external thing.
Yeah. It makes me bring up the question, I don't know the answer to it, but it makes me bring up the question of like trying to almost like prove to yourself that you've gotten over something that maybe you haven't actually gotten over.
Yeah.
And trying to use that as a way to kind of, maybe it's like a final stake in the ground saying, you know, enough's enough, I've had enough, and I'm going to move on from that.
Yeah. It's like the Jim Rohn thing where he talked about a guy who wasn't doing well financially and he was down on his luck and he was like having a pity party and like victim mentality. And then one day the guy took a shotgun to his car, blew out every window, blew out every tire, and let it stand there as a testament to the day he said, enough's enough. Today my life changes.
He's like, not only will I never drive it again,
nobody else will ever drive it again.
So I don't know if that could be said for the boyfriends that they broke up with or that their relationships ended. But I like that idea of like creating this ritual, and it doesn't have to be religious in any way. And I like the idea you mentioned about it could be with people, but it could also be with yourself.
Yeah.
And when you do it with yourself, nobody else has to actually understand the reason behind it. Nobody else has to understand the symbolism. As long as it's meaningful to you, then it could be a useful tool. And I wanted to kind of bring it back to, so we talked about the reason why we wanted to do it for this show. And then I thought about all of the times where we've done ceremonial magic through our relationship, and I had dozens and dozens and dozens of them. And they were all before I even knew what the term was, ceremonial magic. So that's just one way of describing it. Iain mentioned it as a ritual.
Yeah.
Another way to describe it is an illusion, right? So maybe you could talk a little bit about creating illusions, right?
Yeah.
And things to believe in. And then finally, like, we were doing it before we knew what that was. And I wanted to talk about the first time that I ever experienced it very consciously. But can you talk about, like, maybe someone's listening to like ceremonial magic that doesn't really connect with me? What is it? What does illusion mean?
Yeah, so there's like a broad spectrum of like ritual. Like one of the more modern or contemporary versions would be, I don't know, going for a coffee with someone. And then there's kind of like, we're gonna go for a coffee. It's like a friend that you don't see every day. Like the kind of unsaid reality of that is you're going to enjoy that coffee and you're going to talk. You're not going to just like both be on your phones and discussing. So it's kind of just like, I think there's an element of shared activity, and then all the way to the extreme of the ceremonial magic that went into the ayahuasca ceremony that we did, which was like now more than, it was like about 2 years ago now.
Is that in May or April?
I think it was in April 2019. And so we went to this like small church in Toronto.
Yeah.
And so ayahuasca, which is arguably one of the most powerful psychedelic drugs, medicines on earth, compounds. And it's large in South America where we are now, but there's a huge contingent of it in Toronto. And and it's legal because it's religious expression. And so technically it was through this like Catholic Brazilian Portuguese sect of Catholicism called Santo Daime. Anyway, long story short, we go to a small church. We're all wearing white. There's the guys on one side, the girls on the other side. Everyone's wearing white.
Even preparation leading up too. Like I was eating rice and beans and broccoli for 5 days leading up.
Yeah, they wanted you to cut out alcohol and caffeine,
salt,
sugars, and meat, and basically anything that's, I don't know, sensorily enjoyable. I don't know if that's the right word, but anyway, so the guys are on one side, the girls are on one side from some sort of energetic balance intention. Everyone's wearing white, and we went through drinking it and then having the elders play instruments mixed with us being in silent meditation in the dark. And then Jonathan didn't throw up, but like one of the things within the ayahuasca ceremony that's supposed to happen is called the purge, where it's basically you've ingested this substance, you've had some sort of experience, and then symbolically you're shedding some sort of form of your older self, and you're purging everything outside of you. You're symbolically imbuing what you're going to then purge and throw up with something that you want to leave in the past. So if you had some sort of doubt or insecurity or trauma or something like that, you would be imbued within the purging process of getting that out of your system. And then that kind of made me think, you can do that with pretty much everything. There's a lot of things in our modern day that we can kind of outsource, but then there's just certain biological realities that need to be undertaken individually for the most part. And then, I mean, you can use anytime you go to the washroom, you could use it as some symbolic gesture to get it to imbue something.
Why not?
Out of your system if you really want. Why not?
Yeah, that reminds me, because you're talking about this peak experience of doing ayahuasca, and then you're saying, but it could also be done in the mundane, everyday, run-of-the-mill activity. And one of the coming full circle, and I didn't really imbue much ceremonial magic into it, but now that I think about it, you could, was like getting rid of an old pair of shoes. Mm-hmm. I wore these shoes for way too long. They were ripped up, they were torn up. I was waiting for new sandals to come that were supposed to show up in Mexico for Christmas, didn't. And then now in Colombia, 3 months later, they showed up. And when I got rid of those old shoes, it was kind of like a letting go of an identity that I had, because I'm building my identity from thinking of Power of Now and Eckhart Tolle, of the things that I own and the beliefs that I hold. And I was letting go of that. You could totally infuse ceremonial magic in those types of experiences as well. And they're just like every day run of the mill of getting a new pair of shoes.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I like wrote down around the placebo, which is the magic of what's going on. There's I'm not like when like we've talked on the show about a collective effervescence, which is like being at a dance floor and everyone's dancing in the same rhythm, and it kind of creates this collective type consciousness. And it's just realizing the power that you have through I guess you could argue a placebo, but you can literally, like, humans are, like, we've done Landmark, one of the things in that is that we're meaning making machines. Yeah. So it's like you can create, the point around ceremonial magic is you get to create the meaning that it serves you.
There you go.
Basically what we're getting at. Yeah. So
it's like when you talk about choosing illusions that you're compelled by, that you move towards, it's the same as like creating the meaning.
Yeah. Because everything we're talking, like everything that you think is meaning, like passion and love and excitement and full circle completeness and moving on and new horizons, all those things are literally just symbolic words and concepts and ideas, and they're abstractions, which doesn't hold the weight of negative connotation that I think a lot of people might hold it. It just means that you can kind of put the spin on it that you want in a way that serves you.
Yeah, it's empowering.
Yeah, it's empowering. And then I think the coming up to the edge of like where that comes into is having it rooted in some semblance of like reality and logic or something along those lines. So, I mean, if you're creating meaning and illusions around life that literally get in your way of being able to function in the world, then there's a disconnect there. So there's got to be some level of pragmatism or functionality aspect to it. But one of the things you wanted to bring up in this was a quote from El Hobbit.
Yeah, The Hobbit. Just in terms of the last podcast we did, we started talking about The Hobbit, and I was noting for myself that this show is becoming about the books we read, the people we hang out with, and the experiences we have. So one of the books that Iain recommended to me, said if you're going to read any story, if you're going to read any adventure, you should check out The Hobbit. Yeah. He said you'll love it. And so a little bit of a spoiler, if you have never read The Hobbit or seen the movies and you want to, you should skip 5 minutes ahead. But they went through this massive adventure, and they met trolls, and they met massive spiders, and they met elves, and they met goblins, and finally they got to where they were supposed to go, which was this mountain, and underneath the mountain was a dragon, Smaug, and he was sitting on top of this massive pile of gold, and Bilbo Baggins was the thief they chose to help them to recover this gold, and he was going down into the mountain. He had his invisibility ring on, and finally when he met the dragon, they had a conversation, and he found out that there was like a scale missing right where his heart was. Yeah. And it was a perfect place to kill him if you had an opportunity. And he mentioned a word. He said, I don't know if you remember this, he said barrel rider. Yeah. Because Smaug was like, who are you? And he was giving them this riddle of all the things that he had done, but didn't give him his name. He said barrel rider, and then Smaug all of a sudden he pieced it together. He's like, I bet the humans down the road had helped them. And
Bilbo really fucking killed some
people. He got some people devastated, like the whole
got
village.
Some golden gravitas.
Yeah. So anyway, Bilbo just gets away, and then the dragon's like, what am I going to do now? And he flies up out into the town, and the people in the town notice this gleam in the distance on top of the mountain, like, holy shit, the dragon's going to come. And the dragon starts swooping over them and like lighting the forests around them on fire, and like everything's wreaking havoc. And there was a moment near the end where this archer, his name's Barb.
Oh yeah, Barb. Yeah, sorry.
Barbara. Born?
No, I'm fucking.
No, Bard. Yeah, Bard. Bard. So anyway, there was a bird that was with Bilbo, and he was kind of like paying attention to what was happening. And he wanted to warn this Bard guy. Bard. He wanted to warn Bard. So as the dragon was like destroying the town, and this last guy, everyone else was fleeing, and he was like, no, our archers are gonna fight till the death. And he's hanging out there, and finally this bird shows up. He's like, till the death, dude. He's hanging out. He's like, I'm gonna do anything. I'll do anything. And then
ceremonial
the
magic.
Bird shows up, and there's ceremonial magic in this scene. And last night was totally Satori, which is an Eastern word for enlightenment. The rain was crashing on the house, like it was really downpouring. Iain was playing a great set by lane 8, and I was reading basically the climax of this book, and I was like, holy shit.
It's a great book.
It is.
If you haven't taken
awesome
one thing
adventure.
from this, read that fucking
It was
book.
an awesome, thank you for highly recommending it. That being said, most of the books that Iain's recommended to me have been phenomenal. I only read basically like one fiction story or two maybe per year, but every time it's been one that Iain recommended. It's been awesome. And it gets to this point where this bird shows up, and the whole town's devastated, and he's basically got one last chance, and he's like, wait. It said to him, the moon is rising. Look for the hollow of the left breast as he flies and turns above you. And then it goes further down, and here's the ceremonial magic. It's Bard talking to his arrow. So in terms of, you can infuse ritual, you can infuse meaning, you can add illusion wherever you want in your life that's empowering to you. This is what he says. He says, arrow, said the bowman, black arrow, I have saved you to the last. You have never failed me, and always I have recovered you. I had you from my father, and he from of old. If you ever came from the forges of the true king under the mountain, go now and speed well. So he's talking to his arrow, and then he says, and then it goes, the dragon swooped once more, lower than ever, and he turned and dived down. His belly glittered, white with sparkling fires of gem in the moon, but not in one place. The great bow twanged. The black arrow sped straight from the string, straight from the hollow, by the breast where the forced leg was flung wide. In it smote and vanished, barb, shaft, and feather, so fierce was its flight. With a shriek that deafened men, felled trees and split stone, smog shot spouting into the air, turned over and crashed down from high in ruin. I was just reading it, thinking about this show, and I was like, man, that guy just infused ceremonial magic into his arrow.
Yeah, it's just like getting yourself ready. So it's like we talked, and like Jonathan and I were in the same boat when we did the podcast yesterday about kind of us like, we're going to do it, but we weren't like overtly enthusiastic about it. And it was just like I think an element of ceremonial magic is in preparation, in that you don't just have a time that you're going to do something and then show up and be like, now I'm going to turn it on. And because it might work sometimes, but it probably won't work all the time.
And it's not like it was a terrible
episode.
Yeah,
it was just like,
we've gotten to the point of like a certain level of competence where, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
It works, but it's not our best performance.
Yeah. It's just like doing the things that, get you in a certain state. I mean, like,
yeah, it's like a state.
Yeah. You're pumping your own state, basically getting yourself into a position.
Priming.
Like one of the guys we liked old back in the day, Jordan Belfort, talked about, fucking burn fucking hot wax on my
It's beeswax, so it's good for you.
And a guy, actually Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort. He would use
sharp
primers,
as attack, enthusiastic as hell, a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, and he used smelling salts.
Yeah.
Smelling salts to
prepare him
before a closing deal.
Yeah. That's his version of ceremonial magic. So you were just saying, like, in terms of like setting yourself up for success, priming yourself. He primed that arrow.
Yeah.
Right. He did what was self-serving. Like I did a long time ago, one of the very first video series that I made was I Will Teach You to Speak. Stole it from a guy, Ramit Sethi, I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And I was just like, I've been learning public speaking skills. One of the ways I can reinforce those learnings is to teach it. And so I made a bunch of videos, and 3 of them was about preparing for a presentation. And I still use all of those lessons that I shared, and they're on my Instagram if you want to check them out. But the first video was about self-talk, essentially. It was like, whatever you say to yourself is gonna either serve you or it won't.
Yeah.
And I remember early in our Toastmasters days, there was one specific guy who was very hard on himself going into a presentation, and he was just like, it was never setting himself up for success because he was thinking of all the reasons it could go wrong. And then I remember very distinctly one day before a mutual friend of ours, Happy, before he did one of our presentations, I was like, how do you feel? He's like, I'm going to absolutely crush this. Like, no problem. I know this inside and out. It's going to be amazing. And then he did it, and it was phenomenal. And so moving forward, when I was doing presentations, I always tried to position myself as, I got this. This is no problem. I know like the back of my hand. And like that self-talk was the priming and the preparation that I needed.
Yeah. And what do you do What do you do leading up to a speech? 5
A
minutes.
speech.
5 minutes. Say
5 minutes.
the day. Let's say the day of leading up until right on stage.
Like an important one.
Sure.
I could talk about Speaker Slam.
Sure.
Yeah, and like I could talk about it, but I could also share like how, because it's between you and I, when we do the podcast, if we're gonna do the Thursdays at 3, like that way we need a shared ceremonial. Like we can have our own individual, but then when it's a team, it's a group, there's an opportunity to come together.
Especially, I'm just thinking out loud here. It's like, yes, we might need to do our own individual things to get ready, but then also it makes sense to do a walk or doing some meditation or something together to get onto the same wavelength. So we're not one person's like, we're like around the same kind of, we're connected in whatever that means.
Yeah, and Iain and I went for this amazing walk today. It was just like beautiful in the sun all day. It's exactly what we needed. But back to your question, for Speaker Slam, I had all sorts of...
So a speaking competition, day of the speech, Jonathan Andrews has his alarm clock and his eyes open.
Yeah, so I woke up. I was actually at Patrick DeLoso's house. So shout out to Patrick for making it easy to get to the event because he lived really close. And my first high priority for an important presentation is that at least 24 hours before, I can deliver it as if I was going to deliver it for the audience. Because if I don't know it at least 24 hours before, then it's not unconscious. Yeah. And I want it to be an unconscious competence rather than a conscious competence, where I need to like actually pay attention. Like when I'm presenting, I don't want to have to I want to let go and just let it come out. Yeah. I want it to look natural, feel natural. And I think if you watch the Speaker Slam video, it kind of looks like,
you're saying you're kind of flowing it on the spot.
It looks like it was happening for the first time. And so that's the first one, was making sure it's ready 24 hours before. And then, I had an amazing workout that day. I listened to my favorite music that day. I listened to, so when Iain and I were traveling to BC, we did that BC road trip. We listened to an Armin van Buuren set. It was like his Tomorrowland set, and it has the Tarzan drop. Do you remember that?
Of course.
And it's just so high energy.
It's so undeniable.
And so so here's like the real lesson for me is when I went into the last podcast that we did, in terms of like priming myself and getting into a state that would prepare me to perform. Like I didn't have any of that in place. When I went into that Speaker Slam speech, I did a workout and I listened to the hour and 15-minute set by Armin van Buuren where it was like, don't. And it was just high energy. And then after that, I took a shower, put on most of the clothes that I was going to wear, sans the actual outer layer of the suit, and Patrick DeLoso and I had like the most fun hour drive. You've vibed with Patrick to music before, and it's like some of the most fun of all time. So Pat, thanks for setting me up for success for Speaker Slam. And then I got there, and then I was like game face. And the mask that I wore was I'm here to win. Yeah. And I didn't listen. I've never listened to anyone's speech before mine.
Yeah, it makes sense. Doesn't make any sense to listen to it.
And like I'm sure they were great, and I can go back and listen to the recording. But in terms of knowing that the performance has a lot of different outcomes. It has the outcome for the people that are there, right? Them hearing it. Yeah. It has the outcome for the ripples beyond that. And it has the outcome for myself. Yeah. And so I wanted to deliver my best performance. So I was speaker 5 and I just went into a different room, let it all happen. And I was listening actually to just relaxing music. And I was kind of just dancing and just hanging out. I didn't practice the speech at all. So in terms of priming, I disconnected from the words and just got into my body and didn't want to listen to anything else until it was done. And then as soon as it was done, I cracked a beer and I was hanging out with you guys.
Yeah, it seems like, it wouldn't make any sense to kind of, especially in a speech competition in particular, where there's so much emotion and different things, it doesn't make, you want to keep the state that you've cultivated up into that point and not allow it to take the roller coaster of the hero's journey within someone else's speech prior to doing yours.
Yeah. So, that's what I'm taking away from the last episode and, going into this is you get to choose the meaning. You get to choose the illusions. The other thing I want to talk about, because like I said, I made that list of all the different ceremonial magic experiences that you and I have had with, a lot of psychedelics.
Speaking of, after this, we can pack a fat bowl of a cannabis substance to enliven ourselves and listen to fucking an Armin set or something.
Nice. Yeah. So that's like coming full circle and like choosing meaning and celebrating. The last thing I want to talk about is the first time I really experienced it consciously was with Mark Nguyen.
Yeah, Isla Mujeres, Mexico, beginning of 2021, earlier this year.
So you obviously had talked to him about ceremonial magic before that experience because you're the one that kind of shared it with me.
Yeah.
Do you remember how? Well, when we did,
I listened to Duncan Trussell talk about it as well with Joe Rogan.
Did he use that word though?
Yeah, ceremonial magic. There's books on it.
Oh wow. Okay, so
by the way,
if
you were wondering that we are not the experts on ceremonial magic, but
you know what it was like, truly ceremonial magic between you, Mark Nguyen, and I. Kensington Market, was that 2019?
Yeah, it was the month before we did ayahuasca.
Yeah, a month before
ayahuasca, we smoked DMT.
So anyway, we were doing ceremonial magic before we knew what it was, but that was totally ceremonial magic.
Yeah, so I mean,
like Mark led us through a meditation, and we set intent. It's really what it is. It's just setting intention.
Yeah, I mean, it's setting an intention. It's like, it's cultivating or like getting the lens at which you're about to see through the experience that you've set up for yourself to see it in a certain light. So, I mean, if you wanted to see something in a green light, then you might take one of these windows that are behind us in this place that is a green piece of glass, and the light coming through is seen as green. So it's like, I mean, you're queuing up like a way in which to experience. I mean, it's part of curating an experience. I mean, it depends what you want.
Curation, I like that. Curation. That's a good word. We haven't talked about that today.
Ceremonial.
It's like what you focus on expands.
Yeah.
So you get to choose what you focus on, or else you'll kind of. That's a lesson with reticular activation.
Mm-hmm.
With do you know how to describe reticular activation?
Yeah, I would say the best way I've described reticular activation in the past is when we first met, we started doing network marketing, and everyone was talking about like cars,
nice cars,
nice cars all the time, and I've never really
not at all
thought about it or cared. And then everyone was talking about BMWs and Mercedes,
Audis,
and then all of a sudden I started seeing BMWs, Mercedes, and Audis everywhere. And it's not that they weren't there before, but reticular activation is just like what you're looking for. So we could do a live example of right now. I'm going to take you 10 seconds to survey this scene. So it's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Close your eyes. What colors are the door?
Maybe green.
Boom. Got part of
it. Oh yeah, I got a little bit.
You got part of it.
Green,
it's just like
green, yellow, and blue.
Where it's like someone who was like, I don't know, they're painting something and they're excited about green, yellow, and blue. They would have noticed that.
Yeah,
right away.
That reminds me of Alan Watts doing a seminar, and he was talking about like he saw what color dress the woman was wearing.
Yeah.
But he
couldn't recall it.
He can't recall it because he wasn't actually paying attention to the color of the dress. He saw it at some point.
I was just listening. I mean, every podcast ends up to Alan Watts in some form or another.
You got to come back.
I was listening to him today, and he was talking about how our consciousness that we're identified with is like a spotlight of consciousness. So it's like if you're looking at a painting, you're looking at the painting, or you're talking with a friend and it's engaged in that. But the example that he gave is you could be driving down the highway like we were during our road trip, and we could be engaged for an hour of talking, and like and everyone's probably done it where you've driven down for at least a couple kilometers, maybe longer, and not be like, and you're driving, you're like, Jesus Christ, I'm in a multiple 1,000-pound vehicle cruising within a meter of all these other ones, and somehow I'm all right. And his point around that is like the conscious versus the subconscious. Mm-hmm. You have the blood flowing through your veins. You can drive the car while you're listening to music and talking to a friend and not really being actively paying attention to it. And then the mistake that he said is what we make is we become identified with the conscious paying attention of like the direct thing that you have your spotlight consciousness on, and then not realizing that you're aware of so many other things. So it's stepping outside. I mean, just broadening, I guess, your horizons of what you're aware of or being conscious of. And then there's just an infinite amount of things to do that. Because you could be, I mean, we're sitting here and we talk about the door, and then you could want to be more conscious of your surroundings and be like, okay, I'm aware of the tiles now on the floor. But now if you really look at the tiles, there's like some different colors in there.
There's designs inside them.
Yeah, and then you realize there's so much more complexity to things. And then one of the things that, I mean, along with Alan Watts, we always talk about psychedelics. And part of the psychedelic state is, I was reading Aldous Huxley, Doors to Perception, and he was talking about how we, like, for example, we're recording this podcast and the laptop with the video is on top of a table, on top of the floor. And for a matter of like practicality, which is what we talked about earlier on the podcast, when you look at a table, you just see table, and you don't have to like look any further. It's just a table now. And then not realizing like there's so much more depth to that. And when I really realized that was, we were in Costa Rica last, and the two main beers was Pilsen and Imperial. But we have, in North America, we have Pilsner. And because I didn't think about it in the same way you look at a table and like, that's enough, I don't have to look any further. I just saw the Pils, and I just assumed it was Pilsner for 2 months.
Wow.
And I didn't even think of it. Like it didn't even
clearly Pilsen.
I didn't even, because I didn't actually look at it, because I literally jumped to conclusions.
Generalize.
Generalize, and then jump to conclusions, and then have this certainty based on this conviction based on this illusory certainty. And then I realized that it was Pilsen, and then not Pilsner. And then it just made me realize that, like, well, where else is that showing up in my life? And that there's an infinite amount of things that you've probably written off as an assumption of what something is in all facets, in like tangible things within your senses as well as abstract concepts, and then realize how many things we're not actually conscious of, and we just have a general understanding as opposed to a more one rooted in clarity.
We talked about Rumi today.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about Rumi recently. The way you describe him is like a mystic.
Absolutely.
Like like channeling.
Yeah.
Some source that like.
Yeah, there's just, it seems so abundantly clear. When,
right?
Like you read his poems, it's so clear.
Right.
That he's
and he talked about like the new day. Right. And so there's, in terms of like ceremonial magic, choosing your illusions, choosing meaning, you can see every day as a new arising, a new awakening, coming in, like the phoenix rising again. Like one of the things Jim Rohn talks about is that you don't have to be the same. Like whatever you did the last 6 years, you can tear up that script and live a brand new life. And I think that's cool, because he says any day you wish, you can change.
Whichever day you pick. Who can do it? Anybody. When can you do it? Any day you pick.
Any day you pick.
Unbelievable. Yeah,
tonality there. He says 6 years because he talks about like the first 6 years. Yeah, he talks about the first 6 years of his working career, like 19 to 25, he was broke. And he said the next 6, he was rich. And so he says, you don't need to be the same. You can tear up the script. You could do it different. And I think there's an opportunity for us to do that every single day, right? It was funny over the last few days when I've just been like totally enraptured in The Hobbit, where I would wake up. It's like that. It was like that with Musashi. When I read Musashi, and it was like that when I read Needful Things.
When you get into a real page turner.
And I just I woke up, washed my face, and then I laid down with the book and I read for an hour and a half.
And know what's funny about like reading, even if it's a novel, like if you just get done binging a couple hours of like some fucking show, unless it really is like absolute mastery of a certain show, which is very few and far between in my opinion, like you get done and you kind of like, I need to have a shower after watching all those fucking episodes. But there's something like fundamentally different about like reading a really good novel.
Yeah.
And I think it was James Cleary shared something around. He said, it's very hard to find. It's hard, generally speaking, to find something good, productive to watch, and yet it's extremely easy to find something good to read.
Yeah. Interesting. Hopefully you find this interesting to watch, interesting to listen to. But
all these people watching it, they put it on mute, watch this fuzzy potato video through the darkness.
Yeah, if you go to YouTube, you can watch the fuzzy potato video. If you watch a Instagram 5-minute best of clip, you'll be able to watch the fuzzy video. But that I really resonate with that, because like yesterday before we came to Guatape, because we took the bus 2 hours from Medellin to Guatape. Yeah. I don't know if I'm saying it right, Guatape. But anyway, I woke up and I did that routine. I washed my face and I laid back down. I actually made some coffee and I said to myself, one of the philosophies that I'm trying to make part of who I am is, and we're kind of refining this life philosophy as we go, is when you realize that you don't have to do anything, you can do anything.
And drinking coffee and reading a novel in bed when you wake up, tell me that isn't kind of heat. And the craziest thing about that is like you can very easily, in terms of designing a life, which is kind of like, now we're kind of picking up into the mastermind of like what we're talking about here. But if you could have 30 to 60 minutes to read a great book with a coffee in bed, like, and you might even implement before or after like some meditation or something like that. Like that is actually a very doable thing.
Quality morning routine.
That's quality life, like right there.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter. The reason why I paid attention to it was because I was reading a compelling story. Oftentimes when I'm reading nonfiction, what's going on here? Skype.
It's separate.
Oftentimes when I'm reading nonfiction, one of the challenges is like I'm thinking about how am I going to implement these ideas as I go. And so I'm kind of connected to the reading, but I'm also connected to my life, and I'm wondering how it's going to be relevant. But with a story, with the fiction, I was totally disconnected from my physical 3D reality and like imagining. Maybe it took me a couple minutes to get into the groove of, there's a difference between reading the words and picturing it as you go and evoking an image for you. And once you get into the image, once you get into the story, then like I'm totally disconnected from everything else. And I'm just like enraptured. Man.
Yeah. Which is
what a great way to start the day.
I completely
great way to start the day.
I completely agree. And I think it's also like why I love reading nonfiction, but I think on the opposite end of the waking schedule, I think a novel before bed is such an unbelievable thing, because I don't care how, like you could be like a Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr. You could have like the biggest mission on earth that you need to do. And then I would say whether it's true or not, Jeff Bezos always said, my 8 hours of sleep each night is in the best interest of my shareholders.
True.
So it's like, if you think you have a mission bigger than yourself, then you need to get disconnected from that mission as well. And I think a novel before bed is like one of the best things ever, because you're worrying about all your stuff, and then you can kind of just melt into this other world in a way that, like you watch a show, but you can kind of zone out and you can, go on your phone. When you're reading, like if you're reading, you're reading. And if you're not reading, you're not reading. Like everyone's probably got to the bottom of the page and had to restart again. And then at that point you can go to sleep probably.
I like using books before bed as a kind of a measuring stick of if I'm ready to turn my light off, right? If I'm like I always often my dad reads before he sleeps, and when I watch my dad, the book will be like on his chest, and he'd be like clearly ready to go to bed. You can like turn the light off for him. It'd be the same thing. But I don't know if you remember reading, I'm sure you do, Zorba the Greek.
Yeah.
So I bought Zorba the Greek for you because Tim Ferriss advocated for nonfiction before bed, to kind of like disconnect from the the problem solving mind.
Yeah.
Trying to optimize your life and make sure your businesses are perfect.
And then also you put down the book and you're like, I mean, like I had to do some shit I didn't want to do, but I wasn't fucking fighting a dragon, was I?
True.
With one arrow. Like, fuck.
Man, yo, that one is such a crazy adventure. Trolls, goblins.
Not to mention the character
wolves,
that you said with is spiders. A fucking hobbit with dwarves and a fucking wizard. It's just epic.
Yo, Gandalf's heat, dog. Gandalf's heat. Well, Ceremonial Magic, man. This was a good time. Just like the act of consciously thinking about what we were going to talk about, choosing a theme, coming up with some ideas of examples of how to talk about it. I mean, that in and of itself was Ceremonial Magic in terms of just preparation. Yeah. So I'm content.
Yeah. I mean, what was I going to say?
I don't know. The only thing I didn't get to was Playa del Carmen.
Isla
Mujeres.
Martinian.
Yeah.
So January 2021.
We were in Mexico right before going to Costa Rica, and I'm
just laughing because like we get to so much like fun activity that we literally just need to schedule in periods of like nothing.
Exactly.
It's so necessary. Holy freaking crap.
That was perfect. So Ian and I booked like a dope crib. That was a great spot in Isla Mujeres.
Facebook Marketplace.
Facebook
Mark Zuckerberg Place.
And it was a great deal, open concept, had like 3 different stories. So there was tons of space to hang out outside. It was like, Isla Mujeres was very relaxed at the time. And our buddy Mark, who was in Mexico with us as well.
So it's just an island in Mexico of probably a couple dozen thousand people.
It was cool because the beaches and the sunset that we got to see from Cancun were pretty subpar. And then when we went across to the island, the sun set, just like in Santa Teresa. We got to see it from the other side, and it was beautiful and gorgeous. But our friend Mark came over, and we lit candles, and we lit incense, and we did drugs. We smoked some weed, and but he said, no, guys, we can't smoke yet. He's like, what do you guys want to get out of this experience? And to me, I'm thinking to myself, we're just smoking weed, man. What are you talking about? I've done this thousands of times. He's like, no. And it was beautiful. And I'm going to try to infuse some more ceremonial magic.
Yeah.
How's that? Illusions.
How would you recommend someone goes about doing some ceremonial magic in their life?
I think the best way to end this, because it just practically makes sense, is infusing celebration.
I wrote that down, rite of passage, in terms of because it
goes into rite of passage.
Celebration is right.
Thank you for
like it can't be like that. That point can not be underestimated enough or overstated enough. I should say it can be understated. Definitely is my point. I said the exact opposite. Paolo. I think it was Jim Rohn talked about celebration being a rite of passage, and Paulo Coelho.
Anything Jim says,
he's talked about celebration being a rite of passage, and Paulo Coelho talked about, author, writer of The Alchemist, talked about celebration not just being some frivolous type thing that's going on, but it is what gives you like the fun and the experience that you have of celebrating as a rite of passage once you've achieved or completed some sort of noble task, something that you've done that was difficult. It literally gives you the courage. It literally gives you the courage to do it again, because if you set out some extremely hard task for yourself, let's use it allegorically with climbing some sort of mountain. Sure. And we can do that. We can say you get to the mountain and slay the dragon. And then you just slay the mountain, slay the dragon, and then you go back to you just there's no then you've actually robbed yourself the pleasure of an enjoyable experience that has value for its own sake, and well earned, I would say. Well earned. But True. It also it gives you, it literally gives you the encouragement to, and the excitement and the push in the right direction to go forth to the next mountain and slay the next dragon. If that's what you choose to do. And if you just move forward, then it almost turns into like an escapism from enjoying yourself. Like, I mean, you should celebrate when things go well.
Yeah, that reminds me of two things. The first one is just very practically, when we were on the bus yesterday, we took the bus from Medellin to Guatape. And for whatever reason, the first thing that I was inspired to do was to create some templates for the Circle Up podcast. So not the Till the End podcast that you're listening to right now, but a different podcast, Circle Up podcast. And for whatever reason, I was inspired to create those. And one of the templates that I created, because I kind of set out this flow of from invitation for a new guest saying, hey, this is, I'm booking guests for the Circle Up podcast. Please be on the podcast. That's the first one. All the way to the very end of like, hey, can you review the show? I hope you enjoyed the experience with me. One of the major templates that I created was a celebration template, which was the podcast was created and we distributed the podcast. And now we should relish in coming full circle and completing the experience together and be excited about what we produced, because what we did was worthwhile. And what we did was a good, useful time spent.
Pavlovian response.
To be excited about that.
Pavlovian response, because success breeds success, and like you're building the momentum of what you've done of a good thing, and you're in the same way. If you want a dog to salivate at a bell, you give it meat right after it. The old Pavlovian thing. It's like if you do something good that's difficult or like outside of what you would normally do, and you actually do the thing you said you were going to do, now you're reinforcing the reason, like the vigor in which you would go forth to do other things moving forward. It just you're in set. I mean, it just makes sense. It makes sense. You're rewarding doing the right thing.
Yeah, incentivizing yourself.
You're incentivizing yourself. And actually, even Jordan Peterson talked about this. He's like, you need to be at some point or another. Like, if your life's in total disarray, might have to get yourself to do things you don't want to do. But if you say, and you need to start small. And he said, I need to do some sort of important project and it's tedious or whatever. And he's like, well, if you tell yourself I'm going to do that and then I'm going to order a pizza and watch a movie, for example, and then you complete the thing, well, you better fucking order the pizza and watch the movie.
True.
So, and obviously there's like, you can, I'm going to do heroin once I do this. No, I better do the heroin now. I fucking have to. Like, obviously, just like anything, there's ways to do it wrong. I mean, that's why there's an elemental like first principle value of like having good faith when you talk, which I think is valuable.
Do you remember Julian from our men's weekend?
Course,
yeah, hard to forget, right? So he had a brain.
Use the names, not the stories, right?
He had a he's the same guy. I was going to say positive light. He's an awesome guy. He had a brain injury like a decade ago, and then he's
actually Mike's business coach.
Yeah, one of our friends' business coaches. So he's done the Landmark curriculum. We've talked about Landmark on this show multiple times, the personal development curriculum. He's done that curriculum, but he had a brain injury a long time ago, and he found some breathing techniques that worked really well to be able to help him recover. But one of the things that I always remember that he shared with me was results first, celebrate second. Results come before the celebration. Right. And that connects to me to GK Chesterton.
Yeah.
Because GK said, don't use, was it drugs or how did you describe it?
I mean, he was talking about wine, but it's like as
alcohol.
An example, but you could broaden it beyond that.
Yeah.
In terms of like a sensory pleasure. He's like the biggest, along the lines of the biggest, like people shouldn't drink wine because it's bad for you. It's like, well, I mean, it's not good for your health. Well, you shouldn't be, if you're drinking wine for health, and that's the problem. Which goes back to what Alan Watts would say, like if you're going through something, the best thing isn't to dull it by going for a drink. If you're drinking to kind of feel all right with yourself because you can't handle sobriety or something, then that's probably the wrong time to do it. The best time to do it is as a celebration, is to do it on its own. Man, GK Chesterton is just fucking in terms of like one-liners from a prose perspective.
It's almost like Gandalf level.
It's just so. I mean, he preceded Gandalf.
You think so?
Well, it preceded, not exceeded.
Like in terms of before.
I mean, it was literally
Sure.
and J.R. And what I mean by that, to kind of J.R. Tolkien was a British dude. And
probably
he
read
almost
read a little GK.
And a lot of there's a lot of like Christianity archetypical underpinnings to a lot of the Middle Earth world. So, and G.K. Chesterton being like a pretty big theologian, he's Catholic. But I mean, I would like almost guarantee that like there's a real influence. Like I wouldn't be surprised if it was in the top 10. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I just screenshotted it to another friend. And the other thing about telling people in your life the things that you're excited about is that like it's kind of like you tell people about things, and then it's akin to, you know, in elementary school getting a piece of paper and water and soap and throwing it against the wall and seeing what sticks, because what sticks, if it really has value in the right situation, will come back to you. So a friend that we met in Santa Teresa, Elric, who I had recommended G.K. Chesterton, he had seen a quote from him in an article or something that he read, and it said, "There are no rules of architecture for a castle in the clouds." It's just, what the hell,
No
man?
rules of architecture.
There's no rules of architecture.
For a castle.
There's no rules of architecture for a castle in the clouds. Jesus Christ, man. And it's like the same vein as angels can fly because they take themselves so lightly.
I love that one.
That line is stupid.
So here's the last thing that I want to say on this show, and I think it connects perfectly to what you just said.
Yeah, it's just
because
stupid.
You choose the people you spend time with.
Yeah.
And every single influence in your life helps shape your life philosophy, right? The way you look at the world. And I think one of the greatest life hacks that I've ever employed is to give people problems that they're excited to solve,
right,
or to give people things that they're excited to just read and learn about. So like as an example, oftentimes Iain shares with me awesome novels and things like that. And a lot of the times when I don't want to read something, I'll just give it to Gabriel. I'll just give it to Iain because he loves the philosophy and he wants to dive into these minds and these thinkers, especially if they're dead. And then he shares it, and he shares the best stuff. And so in terms of that quote, just coming all around, that G.K. Chesterton quote of the reason angels fly is because they take themselves so lightly. Iain read a book by G.K. Chesterton that I never would have read.
There's no chance.
I wouldn't read it.
Heretics and Orthodoxy. And you're saying that, and I think you should probably read it at some point.
Maybe
but I just mean like without that influence, like maybe like I've told you this story before, but
life hack.
So G.K. Chesterton, the reason I started reading him was I have this like 80-year-old white Jamaican friend I fucking Dale that I like party crashed while doing a door-to-door sales
on my
company.
dating profile.
And anyway, I called him last summer and we just talked for like an hour, and which by the way, I need to do a podcast. We need to do a podcast with him, like that guy. Yeah, I think he's writing memoirs right now.
Dude, till the end, we can have a podcast with anybody.
And anyway, talking to him on the phone, and I was like, "What are you reading right now?" And he said G.K. Chesterton, Heretics and Orthodoxy, which is a collection of writings by G.K. Chesterton. And this is a recommendation from an older friend. And I was like, you know what? I'm fucking excited. I'm pretty sure I was microdosed on mushrooms. Let me buy this book. I bought the book. Amazon. Thank you, Daddy Bezos.
Got it. Holy shit, man. It was massive.
It was. Each one was pretty sure. But it was the aggregation.
Yo, this was like spring, summer 2020. Gabriel and I just lost our jobs. And guy was in the backyard drinking Starbucks coffee every day, reading books.
Yeah. So I start... And this is a G.K. Chesterton. This is like late 1800s, early 1900s. And I started reading the introduction to him that was clearly done by someone like decades and decades ago, like the dry. And I was like, fuck, did I just really buy this book and say I'm going to read this thing? And I got through a couple pages of the introduction. I'm like, I cannot I cannot read this introduction. I'm gonna
Skip right to it.
So I skipped right to the front. I'm like, I'll at least give the actual author a chance.
Sure.
I get through like a single paragraph and I'm just like, God damn. God damn. I mean, he talked about like, he was as I said, he was a Christian theologian, but which I don't agree with, but in terms of like a metaphysical objective
thing, where you're like, there's so many things I disagree with, but it's so I'm gonna keep going.
You can't not. Like, and within the first page or two, he's just talking about how as a society, because we've become so afraid about talking about like the metaphysical claims, like why are we here, what's important, and you just go down the list of all those metaphysical or like really important questions. Sure. And then he said, because those have become so taboo, he said some sort of line along the lines of, everything has been okay to talk about, but everything. And he just like kind of talked about how we've kind of pigeonholed ourselves to talking about every trivial thing in terms of small talk or like office talk or regular day, like mixed water cooler, mixed company conversation. Everything has become okay to talk about, but the only thing that actually matters. Anyway, he goes on to, and it's just like, in terms of throwing out a couple lines that have like inscribed themselves on my brain.
So great.
It's fucking so great. He said like all roads lead to Rome, and that's why so few people ever get there. And I'm just reading it. I was like, God damn, G.K. Chesterton. Yo, he says like, man, when he
this proves my point so well.
In terms of proving the point, and this further proves further proves our point where we've talked about how every single time we walk on our podcast, we end up talking about Alan Watts. Yeah. And I've been listening to Alan Watts for like over 5 years, really seriously the last like 18 months.
Yeah.
But I think I was walking through like Playa del Carmen or something in Mexico, and I was just walking through, and he said, as G.K. Chesterton said, angels can fly because they take themselves so lightly. And I was like, damn, to get an Alan Watts cosign on like a prosy quote on something, like if that isn't like the ultimate. Which, by the way, goes back to, as you mentioned,
if one day Gabriel ever says, as Jonathan Andrews said, then I'll know I fucking made it.
As Jonathan Andrews says.
That's perfect. It just brings it back full circle where, like, give people things they're excited about. Yeah. And the reason why is because that came back to me when we left Santa Teresa. I gave our mutual friend, Mike Maluski, just a note. And it was just thanking him for all the memories we shared. And I added the quote, I added the G.K. Chesterton quote of the reason why angels fly is because they take themselves so lightly. And I said that by hanging out with you, all of us take ourselves less heavily, more lightly, and I felt great about being around Mike's presence, because hanging out with Mike made me feel like I could let go and be myself and not try to be so proper and so serious all the time. But it felt a lot lighter being in his presence. And that never would have came unless I hung out with somebody who digested philosophy and is interested in why we're here and what this is all about, and at least setting a better sail and choosing a better philosophy on how to look at the world. And that's what I'm most excited about this trip, is we've been just piecing together the way we look at the world over time. It's not like a one place and one time. It's complete. It's always free flowing and always continues to grow.
I agree, man. We're just out here trying to refine it, reading the good thoughts. Mm-hmm. It's like, and what I was telling you about yesterday, around if you want to really be like cutting edge or like really learn about things, realizing the totality of human experience is piggybacking on the shoulders of giants. Yep. And that like you shouldn't be spending your time reinventing the wheel. And maybe it makes sense to go back to first principles and make sure that why you believe what you believe is for the right reason. But then like instead of you spending 10 years in a cave, read the guy who talked about synthesized, distilled his experience of 10 years in the cave, and then go from there. It's just a matter of what level you want to do it, what level of this you want to be on.
I'm down to not be in the cave for 10 years. Yeah. Yo, you know what's great is we have Ceremonial Magic on the way. We're gonna close off this show.
Dude, taking this GK chest. Dude,
Ian's got another quote by GK.
Dude, he says, and this is applicable to us now as we travel. He says, "The traveler sees what he sees. The tourist sees what he has come to see."
That reminds me of being in that convenience store.
Yeah.
No list of what I was looking for. We're just in the store, so I could see everything.
Oh yeah,
it's full exploration, right? Was it the adventurer sees what he sees?
Oh yeah. By the way, that's the one of the G.K. Chesterton quotes. He said what we talked about: drink because you are happy, but never because you are miserable.
Yeah, totally. And so GK's got some heat. Heretics and what?
It's called Heretics and Orthodox. Heretics is the first one, and then Orthodoxy.
So we recommend The Hobbit. We recommend G.K. Chesterton. Recommend Alan Watts. And I'm good for this show, dude.
Yeah, I'm good, man.
I'm good for this
show.
Yeah,
I'll close it off with in terms of full circle with the novel around The Hobbit and everything. He says, and I've quoted this to you before, but G.K. Chesterton states, "People wonder why the novel is the most popular form of literature. People wonder why it is read more than books of science or books of metaphysics. The reason is very simple. It is merely that the novel is more true than they are."
My friend.
Until the end.
Ceremonial Magic.